Hey everyone, I'm Hans from Rendyr. Welcome back. You may have wondered before what to do if your laser cutting project is larger than the work area of the Optic. The answer is to use Optic's infinite workspace technique. Today we're going to dive into a step-by-step tutorial on how to use the infinite workspace technique to cut large designs with your Optic portable laser cutter using this cool oversized project as our example. And just a note, we don't recommend this as your first project with the Optic. We suggest completing one or more other projects with your Optic before you dive in on an infinite project. If you're following along at home, I'd recommend watching this tutorial all the way through once before trying it yourself, so you've got the full picture of what we're doing. Now let's get started. Our objective is to cut a design larger than the Optic's 12 by 18 work area. First, we'll divide the design into smaller tiles that fit within the work area, and then we'll use one of the Optic's most unique features. It's designed to be placed directly on top of the workpiece. Once we remove the Optic from the cutting mat, we can cut the first tile and then simply move the Optic over the material to the next section and use LightBurn to align them accurately for a seamless result, and repeat. Today, we'll be demonstrating how to split your artwork into just 2 tiles, but with the Optic, you can expand your workspace in any direction as far as you want, making the workspace and the possibilities truly infinite. Now, let's take a look at the artwork we'll be using. I'll be using this stylized bird design that I'll be cutting from a large sheet of matboard. But if you're following along at home, you can use any artwork you like. My settings will be 4 passes at 16 millimeters a second and 100% power. But just remember to reference our How to Determine Cut settings with your Optic video to make sure your material and settings are optimized for your specific project. This will help you get the best results possible. Once you have your artwork ready, the next step is preparing it for the cutting process. We'll start by resizing the design to the size we want for the final result, which for this demonstration will be 21 by 15 inches. The cutting mat area is only 12 by 18, so that's about twice as wide as we would normally be able to make our projects. Now, for tiling the artwork, LightBurn has a convenient tool we can use called Cut Shapes. This tool acts like a cookie cutter, dividing the design into smaller, manageable tiles that fit within the Optic's work area. Since I'm only doing 2 tiles for this demonstration, I'll only use 1 cutting shape, but if you're doing more tiles, you would use more than 1. I'll go ahead and create my cutting tool and go ahead and resize it to 11 by 17 inches, which will provide some buffer space around the artwork. And then I'll put it in position so the edge is in the center of my artwork, so that I'll end up with 2 evenly sized tiles. Then we're ready to cut. And it's important, for the tool to work correctly, you need to select your artwork first, then the shape you want to cut with, and then use the Cut Shapes tool, located here under the Tools menu. If you swap that order that you select the artwork and the cutting shape, it won't work correctly. After that, I'll go ahead and assign them to separate layers to differentiate the 2 tiles. After dividing the design, we need to prepare for alignment. This is crucial for making sure that each tile fits together perfectly. We'll be adding target marks like crosshairs at strategic points. And these marks are essential for alignment and need to be visible on the material for the process to work. Think of them as guideposts that ensure each piece of the puzzle fits together seamlessly. When we move to the next tile, we'll be using a built-in tool in LightBurn that partially automates the alignment process and automatically compensates for any misalignment or skew in your positioning. It's worth noting that if you aren't cutting your design out of your material and instead are engraving on a large object and you don't want the target marks to show up on the finished product, you can engrave the marks at low power on pieces of blue painter's tape instead, which can be removed once all the tiles have been completed. Now, to create these target marks, we first need to turn on Snap to Object in the Settings menu. Then we will create a circle, then add lines as crosshairs by using the Line tool. Clicking once on the top, and then the bottom, then hit Escape or Space, looking for the crosshair mouse icon to indicate we are snapping our lines to the object. Then repeat for left to right. Just make sure not to click and drag. Next, I need to group the lines and the circle together so that the software can recognize them as target marks, since it is looking for a single object or single grouped object to align with. After grouping, copy and paste to make a duplicate. I'll then position them as such on either side of my artwork, with the goal being to have them placed along the seam of the tiles. We want the target marks to be located such that they are at the edge of the tiles so that they fit within the work area of both tiles. If I were to put the target marks here on the other side of the work, it would be outside of the optic's reach when I move to the next tile. I'll also put these target marks in a different layer and assign engraving settings to them rather than cutting, which in this case will be 75% power at 20 millimeters a second with just one pass. Now let's move on to executing the first cut, and we'll start by setting up the optic and the material. If your material fits in between the body and the support wheel, like so, you can leave the optic attached to the cutting mat. But if it doesn't, you can remove the optic from the cutting mat and place it directly on the material, which is what we'll be doing today. Here are a few tips for when you remove the optic from the cutting mat. First, there are anti-slip rubber feet on the bottom of the optic that will help prevent any accidental movement of the optic relative to the material during projects. And second, if you have large sheets of material, like so, that aren't perfectly flat, the weight of the optic sitting on top will help weigh them down and keep things flat, but generally, you want your material to be as flat as possible. And finally, whenever you move the optic from the cutting mat, you'll need a sacrificial backer material so you don't cut into your tabletop or whatever surface you're working on. I'll be using some masonite boards as my backer material today. I'll go ahead and lift the optic off the cutting mat and onto the material, placing it roughly where I want my first tile to go. Then in LightBurn, I'll make sure the layers we need are set to output and the others are turned off. If you get this message, then you have the layer for the next tile still turned on. So double check if this happens, as LightBurn is warning you that something isn't right. Then I'll use the frame feature to make sure the optic is aligned properly to my material. Once everything's in place, we can run the optic to cut the first tile, ensuring that those important target marks are engraved along with your design. They'll be crucial for the next steps. I'll meet you back here once the first tile is complete. With the first tile cut, we can move on to subsequent tiles. Before we can start the alignment process, we need to scoot everything over to the next tile of our project, both in LightBurn and with our physical material. In LightBurn, I'll select everything, then drag it over so that the work area of the optic encloses the full area of the next tile, plus the target marks, leaving ample room on either side in case things are slightly misaligned. Then in the Layers menu, turn off the first tile layer and turn on the layer for the second tile. Then I'll do the same movement operation with my material, except for this time, picking up the optic and moving it over on my material, but still making sure that the work area of the optic encloses the full area of the next tile, including those target marks. Now, this next section is going to sound a bit tricky at first, but I promise that it'll be a breeze once you've been through the process for the first time. Before we start, here's an explanation of why we're doing what we're doing. The optic doesn't know where the material and our existing tile is yet, but as long as you home the optic first, it'll always know where it is within its work area, and that's where the target marks we've already engraved come in. We'll move the optic directly over target position 1 and tell it, this is target position 1. And then we'll move it to the second target mark and tell it this is target position number 2. And then, using that information that we've now given it, LightBurn now knows where both the optic is itself within its workspace and where our material and our existing tile is. And it can automatically align the two. Now we'll actually do that with our material and the optic. To start off and get us in the general area of our first target mark, I'll use this tool in LightBurn that allows me to click somewhere inside the optic's work area to automatically move the optic to that location. So I'll go ahead and click on the first target mark to move the optic to that general area, which it does. Now we need to line up the optic's laser with the target mark as closely as we possibly can. To do this, we'll need to turn on the laser so we can see its exact location, which means glasses on. We can then turn on the laser by going to the console, pressing the fan's laser enable button, then going to the Move tab and setting the power to 1% or below, and pressing the fire button. The button in LightBurn should turn red, and you should now be able to see a light blue dot on your material. Just note that even 1% power can sometimes be enough to mark your material, so if this is a concern, make sure the laser is not positioned over an area that will be visible on the final product. Now we need to jog the laser to perfectly align with the center of the crosshairs in the target mark. You can use the buttons in the Move tab to do this. I'll start by setting my move distance to be 0.05 inches or 50 thousandths of an inch, and my move speed to 100 millimeters a second. If your computer is further away from your optic and it's awkward to press the buttons with your mouse in LightBurn, you can change your hotkeys so you can jog the optic using your keyboard, which is what I'll be doing. I'll be pressing Alt plus the arrow keys to move the optic. We'll share a link below to a hotkey preferences file with this change for your convenience. Now I'll jog the optic in on the target mark, and I'll need to see what I'm doing here, so I'll turn on my phone flashlight and place it behind the optic to illuminate the material and the target mark. Once I'm as close as I can get with 50 thousandths increments, I'll switch to 0.01 inch or 10 thousandths increments by changing the distance in the Move tab to 0.01 inch. And then continue to adjust the position until it's as close as I think I can get it. Now I'll drop down to 0.02 inch or 2 thousandths increments for final adjustments. Take your time here, as this step is all about precision. That looks good to me. Now we'll let LightBurn know that this is the location of our first target mark, and we do that by selecting the target mark, then going to our Laser Tools menu, then Print and Cut, and selecting Set First Target Position. If this option is grayed out, you may have more than one object selected. Once we've done that, the target mark should become highlighted, as well as the item in the menu. We'll repeat this process for the second target mark and meet you back here once that's done. Just make sure not to unlock the optic's motors by pressing the button on the optic, as doing this will cause it to lose its position. Now that we've got both target marks read into LightBurn, we can go ahead and go to the Print and Cut menu under Laser Tools and select Align Output to Targets. And then we should see that Ready, over here by our Start and Stop controls, is now Ready Print and Cut, which tells us we're ready to engrave the second tile. You should also see down in the right-hand corner a message that says Enabled Modes Print and Cut. Now I'll double check my layer outputs and go ahead and hit start on the second tile. I'll meet you back here once that's done. All right, that second tile just finished cutting, so let's clear away the excess material and take a look at the results. Nice, that looks really awesome. That turned out super well. I'm really happy with that. The seam is completely invisible, except for very minor artifacting around the edge, but that looks pretty sweet to me. I'm pretty happy with that result. Seeing this makes me think of all the super cool possibilities for future oversized projects. Things like engraving coffee tables and bar tables, that sort of stuff. You can actually see a few of those projects on our website and on our Instagram. Before we wrap up, I want to emphasize a few points for ensuring success. First, accuracy is key, so make sure you have good lighting and you can see your target marks well when you're aligning each tile. Then, test cuts can be a lifesaver, so consider running them on the same materials to fine-tune your settings before diving in on the main project. And finally, patience is your best friend. Aligning each tile carefully will ensure you achieve the best results possible. If you're confused or unsure, or if you're new to LightBurn in general, I highly recommend watching LightBurn's own tutorials on this process, as they are very similar and go into a lot more detail in general LightBurn operations than we really have time for today. We'll provide links to those videos in the description, as well as a link where you can download our file if you want to follow along or use our project file as a template for this process. Just remember, this video is a demonstration of the technique. Take it and run with it, regardless of your project. The principles you've learned will remain the same. And that's it for today's Infinite Workspace tutorial. By following these techniques, you'll be able to create stunning, large-scale designs that you wouldn't be able to achieve with just one piece. If you have any questions or tips of your own, feel free to leave a comment below, or reach out to us directly at hello@rendyr.inc. Thanks for watching, and happy crafting with your Optic!